types of braking system. Well, camera fell off. Baitcasters. Arguably one of the most terrifying reels you'll ever own. Arguably also one of the most rewarding and fun to fish once you get the hang of them. These are the reels you see when you watch Bassmasters. These are reels you see when you watch YouTube videos. They're a low profile, sort of sleek, electronic, techy looking type of reel. But they're also pretty terrifying to attempt to fish. In this episode, I'm going to be showing you how to cast one of these like a pro. So this is a baitcaster. You've probably seen one. They're an open spool casting reel, specifically designed to cast baits, lures, hard artificial lures and baits, specifically designed for bass fishing. They were not designed to cast far. They were not designed to catch huge amount of fish, besides the giant bass that you'll catch once you learn to fish one of these. They were simply designed to fish sort of close quarters, 50 yards and under casts, to fish lures like you would with bass fishing. They have usually around 100 to 150 yards of line capacity depending on what you have on here, and they are usually a little bit more expensive because they're usually built better. So this particular one is a Lew's Speed Spool Tournament Laser. I don't exactly know the exact model of this, but it is a very nice reel. It's got 10 shielded ball bearings and a whole bunch of other pizzazz that you don't really need to know all about that to learn to cast one of these. Basically, what it comes down to is this is an open-faced reel, a lot like a spinning reel, but the spool on this is mounted sideways, and when you turn the handle, it turns the spool as if it was winding line in, sort of like a winch. That's where you hear the term winching power. These are usually a lot more powerful. Reels are designed for lifting and pulling fish out of cover and for winching and baits. A spinning reel, the way it reels, is it's a fixed spool reel. This is an open spool, spinning spool reel. So the spinning reel, what happens is the entire reel has a rotor. The rotor turns, wraps the line around the spool as the spool moves up and down. The spool stays fixed, but it rotates when you turn the handle, depending on the gear ratio of your reel. Gear ratio can usually be found on the underside of the star drag. This is a 6.4 to 1 gear ratio. What that means is every time I make a complete turn of the handle, the spool went around 6.4 times, which is somewhere around 30 inches of line each crank. This is a relatively common gear ratio for a reel. You don't want something super fast, unless you're fishing something super fast that requires that. You don't want it super slow. This is sort of your average run-of-the-mill and good line retrieval speed for a lot of reels. So let's get more into the casting of this reel. What you will notice when you first pick up a bait casting reel is they mount on top of the rod. They seem very similar to someone who doesn't know a bit about them to a spin casting reel, which also parks on top of the rod, but that is a closed face reel. This is an open face reel. The spin casting reel, which is your normal push button fishing reel everybody starts with, they actually use the cone on the front to narrow the line, slow the line down, and keep you from getting tangles. Baitcaster, there's nothing, so that's where you hear the term backlash come in. But it mounts on top of the rod, and the rods are usually shorter and a bit stiffer and heavier than your spinning rods, those type of things. The reason for that is they're designed for lifting. They're designed to set the hook, fish baits, and cast shorter distances, but have the power to get fish out of cover. That's what bass casting rods are designed for. They also are a bit more versatile than I'd say a spinning reel is, simply for the reason that a spinning rod doesn't have enough lifting power for the most part to get fish out of cover, but with the right baitcaster you can throw lighter lures like you can with spinning rods. So if you master these and you get a good quality setup, which doesn't have to be crazy expensive, you can really fish just about anything. So basically how the baitcaster works when you cast is it's got a button here. Now this button, push down, that releases your spool. When you turn the handle, obviously it closes, a lot like the bail on a spinning reel or the button on a push button reel. What happens is, and what you want to do, you push down the button and you clamp your thumb to the spool. That is how you stop the line from coming out. A lot like a spinning reel where you pinch the line to the rod blade. So then you just make a cast. But that's where things start to get complicated. When you cast a baitcaster, the spool starts spinning as it lets line out, like so. The problem is there's nothing to slow the spool down. So your thumb has to do that job. That's where you hear the term thumbing the spool, feathering the spool. That's how you slow the lure down, get it to land where you want, and keep it from backlashing. Now what happens is, this spool starts spinning, and how you get a backlash is, if you were to just make a cast, let this spin, the spool starts to overspin itself once the lure hits the ground and there's no longer line coming out, and you get one of these, basically loops of line that are puffed up above the spool. That is a backlash, and those are not fun. They're relatively easy to get out, but that's beside the point. They do take time out of fishing, and let's face it, no one wants to get one of these. I mean, yeah, they're not fun. A lot of times what happens is you'll pull the spool out, and you'll wind up getting a bigger bird's nest on the ground, trying to keep the line tight as you reel it back in, and the whole thing becomes a fiasco and just a giant pain. So once you get that relatively sorted out, you're ready to go again, but chances are the same thing is going to happen. Baitcasters have two types of... So certain things are incorporated into a baitcaster reel to enable you to get less backlashes, and almost eliminate them completely unless you make a bad cast, which happens to everybody. What you need to know is baitcasters have two types of braking systems. This can aid you in slowing the spool down, and also eliminate backlashes. Number one, this knob right here. What you may notice is you've got your star drag, that's how you adjust the drag. But you have this knob below it. This is your spool tension knob. Turning this applies or decreases the tension on the spool and lets it spin more freely. If I were to tighten this all the way down, you can see I can barely turn the spool. It does not want to turn. If I were to loosen this all the way up, you'll notice the spool spins incredibly freely, but it also rocks back and forth in there because there's no longer tension on it. That's what the spool tension knob does. As a general rule of thumb, you want to set this so your lure falls relatively slowly, hits the ground, and doesn't cause a backlash. Now, that can be relatively challenging because that means you have to reset it every time you cast a lure. But for the most part, when you start out fishing these, you're probably going to be fishing a Texas rig, maybe a crankbait, something like that. And an easy way to set this is simply to set it until the spool does not rock back and forth. If you look very closely here, you'll notice the spool moves back and forth when I rock it with my thumb. So you want to just adjust this until the spool no longer rocks back and forth, and that is a good setting that will eliminate a lot of backlashes. If you start to get backlashes, tighten it down a bit, especially if you're new and you're trying to learn to cast one of these. Tighten this down a lot. You may not get as long a cast, but you will not have backlashes, and it'll be a lot easier to learn. Next up, you've got this dial on the side. On the side of your reel is a dial. It clicks, it's got numbers on it. Some just have numbers and they say min and max on the side. What this is a magnetic braking system. A lot of baitcasters have a magnetic braking system and a centrifugal braking system, as well as a spool tension knob, but a lot just have a magnetic braking system. What this is basically a dial that turns. If it's set on 0 and it sets on 10, those are all your different settings. Basically, it moves magnets closer to the end, closer to the lip of the spool. I'll show you that. There's a pin on most baitcasters that allow you to easily slide this side cover off. Now, if we set this aside for a second, we look at this. There are actually 5 rare earth magnets embedded in this. If I turn this dial, you'll notice the magnets go up, move up and down inside the spool. That actually gets them to be closer and farther away from the spool lip. Now the spool lip is magnetic. As you can see, it is metal and it is magnetic right there. So these magnets stick to this and they actually slow the spool down and are just a normal brake, almost like a disc brake. That will keep your baitcaster from getting a lot of backlash. So you want to set these. I'll tell you how to do that in just a second. You may also notice these white pins. Now this reel has a fairly advanced centrifugal braking system. What a centrifugal braking system is as you go, these pins will slide out and they will actually rub on this lip right here, further slowing the reel down depending on how your magnetic braking system is set. So to set a magnetic braking system is fairly easy. For most lures that weigh, quarter ounce standard lures that you fish, KVD 2.5s your normal. So a good way to set both your magnetic braking system and your spool tension knob is to tie on the lure that you're going to want to fish. In this case, I just put about a little 1/4 ounce jig here on for demonstration purposes. Now, what you're going to want to do is reel that up to the rod tip, and you're going to want to just simply push the button and let it fall. Now, if your reel does this, you need to adjust some things. So get your backlash out. With the most part, you shouldn't get a really bad backlash doing that. Don't let it fall from too high, and just, pull it out, get all the loose wraps of line off. Fortunately, backlashes come out relatively easy, but there's still a bit of a pain. Reel that back in. Right. If that happens, you want to adjust your tension knob forward a bit, and you're going to want to adjust this. I like to keep my magnetic braking system on a 5 or a 6, between the 5 and the 6 for most all lures. If I'm going a little bit heavier, I'll go up to an 8, and if I'm going down, I'll only go to about a 3.5, so about between the 3 and the 4. Between about 3.5, 5.5, and an 8 are all the really settings you need to do on this, staying with about a 5.5. So we're going to leave that there. So let's try this again now that we've adjusted our tension knob on our braking system. So a good way to set both your magnetic braking system and your spool tension knob is to tie on the lure that you're going to want to fish. In this case, I just put about a little 1/4 ounce jig here on for demonstration purposes. Now, what you're going to want to do is reel that up to the rod tip, and you're going to want to just simply push the button and let it fall. Now, if your reel does this, you need to adjust some things. So get your backlash out. With the most part, you shouldn't get a really bad backlash doing that. Don't let it fall from too high, and just, pull it out, get all the loose wraps of line off. Fortunately, backlashes come out relatively easy, but there's still a bit of pain. Reel that back in. Right. If that happens, you want to adjust your tension knob forward a bit, and you're going to want to adjust this. I like to keep my magnetic braking system on a 5 or a 6, between the 5 and the 6 for most all lures. If I'm going a little bit heavier, I'll go up to an 8, and if I'm going down, I'll only go to about a 3.5, so about between the 3 and the 4. Between about 3.5, 5.5, and an 8 are all the really settings you need to do on this, staying with about a 5.5. So we're going to leave that there. So let's try this again now that we've adjusted our tension knob on our braking system. Now you'll notice my lure is not falling at all. As you can see, my lure is not falling at all. It's not taking any line out if I jerk it. That means this is too tight. So let's try this again. We need to go back down just a tad. Let's try this again. Simple drop test. We got backlash again. So we're just going to tighten this up a teeny bit. Last time we should have it now, and that's perfect. Now if you notice, this lure falls. Now if you notice, this lure falls nice and slow and does not give us a backlash. That's what you're looking for. You want the lure to slowly fall down from your rod tip, like so. About that speed, and not give you any bird's nest or just a few tiny loops. Once you have all that set up, you're ready to cast. So once you have your reel set up with its tension knob and some braking system set up, casting is fairly simple. All you have to do, hold on, push down the button and crank it under the spool. You then simply bring the rod back into your casting spinning reel, come forward, and just remove your thumb a little bit. I got a little bit of bird's nest there, but remove your thumb just enough to where the spool can spin. You don't want to take your thumb off. You don't want to keep your thumb pushed down, otherwise your lure's going to spin back and wind up smashing into you or breaking something. So what you really want is just a light sort of feathering touch on the spool. People like to do it different ways. Some people like to just feather the edge of the spool. I like to just keep my thumb on the spool at all times. It's just sort of a light feathering. Use some simple casts, feathering the spool, you'll stop, and you don't get a backlash. Look at that. If done correctly, you shouldn't get a backlash. Now this is going to take patience, it is going to take practice, as with all things in fishing. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to not get backlashes. If you're afraid you're getting backlashes, just tighten this up some more. You won't get near as much distance, but you won't get a backlash. So once you have your reel set up with its tension knob and braking system set up, casting is fairly simple. All you have to do, hold on, push down the button and clamp your thumb to the spool. You then simply bring the rod back into your casting spinning reel, come forward, and just remove your thumb a little bit. I got a little bit of bird's nest there, but remove your thumb just enough to where the spool can spin. You don't want to take your thumb off, you don't want to keep your thumb pushed down, otherwise your lure's going to spin back and wind up smashing into you or breaking something. So what you really want is just a light sort of feathering touch on the spool. People like to do it different ways. Some people like to just feather the edge of the spool. I like to just keep my thumb on the spool at all times. It's just sort of a light feathering. Use some simple casts, feathering the spool, you'll stop, and you don't get a backlash. Look at that. If done correctly, you shouldn't get a backlash. Now this is going to take patience, it is going to take practice, as with all things in fishing. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to not get backlashes. If you're afraid you're getting backlashes, just tighten this up some more. You won't get near as much distance, but you won't get a backlash. I would say that's the easiest and simplest way to learn to cast a bait caster, is simply keep this tightened down. Remember how to adjust it, because once you've gotten the hang of casting it and feathering the spool, you would want to adjust this to get more casting distance. But simply just tighten this down, not all the way, just tighten it down, make a cast, and it'll teach you to cast, but you don't have to worry about a backlash. You can see, even if I make a large overhang cast, I didn't feather the spool at all, we got no backlash. That's the easiest way to learn. But that isn't teaching you a lot, unless you are remembering to feather the spool. So I like to just loosen that up to where we had it adjusted so the lure falls nice and slow. It doesn't give us a backlash. And then, once again, you just simply want to make a cast and feather that spool and stop it as the lure hits the ground. You don't really ever want to just slam on the brake, because your lure will hit the end line and bounce back, and you don't want to not brake. It's a lot like driving a car. You don't ever slam on the brakes, and you don't ever just not push. You want to slowly apply pressure and bring the lure to a stop near where you want it to get. Once you figure this out, you can really cast incredibly accurately, and even put it into like a coffee cup at a certain amount of distance. So that's really the basics of how to cast a bait caster. It may seem a little complicated, but what I'd recommend doing is watching this video, getting your reel out, and looking at the parts as I show you them. That will really allow you to get the most out of this and learn to cast a bait caster. It's really not that hard. You really just gotta have a little bit of patience, a little bit of time to practice, and just not give up and keep trying. So there you go, guys. That is how to cast a bait caster. Hopefully that helped. If it did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.